A simple black woman in a plain white dress steps into the prestigious chess club, the Grandmaster's circle, drawing curious and judgmental stares. Nathan Hale, the reigning champion of the club, challenges her to a match, intending to humiliate her for his own amusement. A crowd gathers, eager to witness yet another victim of Nathan's cruelty. But when Amira Cole makes her first move, the smug smile vanishes from Nathan's face. Each calculated move she makes dismantles his defense, revealing a brilliant mind behind her modest appearance. The arrogant chess master and his elite audience had no idea that the woman they mocked was once a chess prodigy who had walked away from fame. Now, they were about to learn a powerful lesson. The circle of grandmasters was created to inspire fear. Marble steps, tall doors, polished mahogany, and air thick with expensive perfumes guaranteed this. Inside, beneath the glare of chandeliers, men in formal suits and women in custom-made dresses leaned over chessboards, like generals on a battlefield, their conversations reduced to refined whispers, as if the very sound of their voices was a crime. 42-year-old Nathan Hale sat at his usual table, his pale blue eyes scanning the room like a predator assessing its prey. His graying hair, immaculate dark blue suit, and custom-made cufflinks in the shape of knight's armor were testament to the wealth and power he had earned through the quiet, calculating precision with which he crushed his opponents. He had been the club's reigning champion for 6 years and defended that title like a monarch defends his throne. Another boring evening, he said to Simon Green, who was standing next to him. No one to play with lately. Simon grinned. Maybe you've outgrown us all. Nathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Maybe. Then the heavy doors creaked open, and the harsh city light flooded into the room, and a woman who didn't belong in this world, by their standards, entered this refined world. Amira Cole paused in the doorway, surveying the room without hesitation, her deep brown eyes taking everything in without betraying the slightest emotion. She was 39, dressed in a simple red jacket and a white button-down dress belted with a worn leather belt. And her natural black curls were pulled back into a neat bun, not a single hair out of place. But she was far from the glossy perfection of the women sipping wine at the tables. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked in a tone that made it clear she didn't want to. "I'm here to meet Elias Carter," Amira replied in an even voice, looking her straight in the eye. "He asked me to come at 8. The reception manager blinked, clearly not expecting that name. "He called and said he'd be late. But you can wait." Her gaze slid over Amira's clothes, barely concealing her disapproval. "Thanks," Amira said, already walking past her, calm and direct, and took a seat near the main playing area, where she began to watch the games, not as a tourist, but as someone who understood the language spoken on the boards. Nathan noticed her immediately, not because she was loud or flashy, but because she was watching with an intensity that didn't fit the role he had mentally assigned her. "Who's that?" he asked Simon, nodding in her direction. Simon shrugged. "No idea. She doesn't belong here. Probably someone's housekeeper." Nathan smiled coldly. "She looks like she knows the game." "I doubt it," Simon snorted. "She probably just likes the shiny figures." But Nathan didn't laugh. Something about Amira's quiet presence, her confidence, her calmness, contradicted his world, where people like her didn't appear in places like this unless they were carrying trays. "Maybe," he said, slowly getting up, "we found ourselves some entertainment for the evening." When Nathan crossed the room, all eyes followed him. He rarely interacted with strangers and never showed any interest in them. Amira didn't flinch when he approached. Her gaze was still fixed on the game, which was nearing its end. A trap was quickly forming on the queen's side, and she spotted the checkmate in 5 moves before the players did. "Enjoying the view?" Nathan asked. She looked up. "Yes. Thank you." "Do you play?" he asked, barely hiding his mockery. "A little," she replied neutrally. "A little," he repeated, amused. "How cute." People began to gather around them. Nathan never did this without a reason. "I'm Nathan Hale," he said, expecting to be recognized. "Club champion." "Amira Cole," she replied without emotion. No reaction, no admiration. Nathan blinked, then leaned toward her. "Want to play?" "I like showing newbies." The club members exchanged smirks. They all knew what this meant: public humiliation under the guise of hospitality. "That's nice, but I'm waiting for someone," she said. "It won't take long," he insisted. "Just for fun." More people came closer, abandoning their games. Nathan's introductions were legendary. "I'd rather not play," she repeated firmly. His smile faded. "Afraid to play a little? Didn't you say you played?" "I said I play a little." "That's not the same thing." Laughter filled the room. Nathan clenched his jaw. "One game," he said, his voice already sharp. Unless, of course, you don't think our club is worth your time. She sighed, glancing around. All eyes were on her, some smiling, some expectant. She knew that another refusal would only make things worse. All right, Mr. Hale. One game. His smirk returned as he pointed to the table in the center of the room. Excellent. Shall we begin? As Amira stood to follow Nathan, the front doors opened again and Dr. Elias Carter entered. Tall, stoic, 70 years old, wearing wire-rimmed glasses that framed sharp eyes that quickly scanned the growing crowd around the main table, lingering on Amira standing opposite Nathan Hale under the chandelier before calling out to her. Amira, in a tone that was a mixture of surprise and familiarity. She turned to him with calm warmth and replied, "Yes, Mr. Hale suggested I play while I waited." Elias's gaze shifted to Nathan, then back to Amira, a shadow of concern flashing across his face, but also something more acute, curiosity. "Really?" he asked quietly, then added, "Well, that should be interesting. Are you ready? If you want, we can leave." But Amira, as unruffled as ever, shook her head. "It's just a game." The crowd around them leaned closer as Nathan pointed with feigned politeness to the chair opposite the white pieces. "Ladies first." Amira sat down without a word, adjusting her chair, and her fingers involuntarily touched the white king, a movement that caught Elias's attention but went unnoticed by the others. The circle of Grandmasters was accustomed to Nathan crushing all his opponents, and tonight promised another quick defeat. The outsider would be put in her place. "Standard tournament rules?" Amira asked in an even voice. Nathan raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Are you familiar with tournament rules?" She nodded. "As I said, I play a little." Her tone was modest, but her presence changed the atmosphere in the room, although few noticed it yet. Nathan nodded to Simon Green, who approached with a clock. 20 minutes each. Nathan placed his black pieces with casual confidence, while Amira aligned hers with purposeful movements. Although the audience didn't notice, Elias did. She wasn't hesitating, she was preparing. Nathan threw in one last jab. "I usually give beginners an advantage. Would you like me to remove a rook or a knight?" Some people smirked. Amira stared at him motionless. "That won't be necessary." Nathan shrugged. "As you wish." The clock was started. Amira opened the game with e4, clean and decisive. Silence fell over the room. Nathan quickly responded with a knight to f6, seeking control. Amira followed with a knight to c3, precise and smooth. Nathan looked up, slightly surprised. "An interesting choice. In chess, every move should be interesting," she said without looking at him. Nathan played a5, capturing space on the queen's flank. Amira responded with a bishop move to b5, pinning his knight and causing a whisper in the crowd. Nathan's smile disappeared. "Your mentor taught you well," he said coldly, but Amira did not respond. She was focused, and as the moves continued, the tone in the room changed. This was no longer a match for the spectators. This was the real thing. Nathan wasn't just playing for the crowd. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't playing to win quickly, but to survive. 20 minutes into the match, the atmosphere in the Grandmaster's circle shifted from smug anticipation to quiet disbelief, as what had begun as a staged humiliation orchestrated by Nathan Hale turned, move by move, into a brutal clash of minds that left everyone in the room holding their breath. Nathan's characteristic confidence vanished. His sly smile gave way to the focused expression of a man who had lost control as Amira Cole destroyed the rhythm he relied on with cold, surgical precision. His fingers hovered uncertainly over each piece, his forehead glistening with sweat, while Amira sat motionless, her hands steady, her movements deliberate, her face unreadable. The knight she sacrificed in the middle of the game was no accident, but a calculated move that gave her control of the center and pushed Nathan out of his comfort zone into a spiral of reactive moves, each move further exacerbating his disadvantage, and his elegant counterattacks followed a second too late, and with each delay, the tension on his side of the board intensified. Elias Carter, standing at the edge of the crowd, needed no commentary. He saw everything. He understood the meaning of Amira's subtle pawn move, recognized the trap long before Nathan did, and the proud smile that appeared on his lips said he was not surprised. "Chance," Amira said quietly, moving her bishop along a clear diagonal, forcing Nathan's king to flee and leaving his rook unprotected. Nathan responded harshly, buying time, but Elias noticed his jaw twitching, the same sign he had seen many years ago when Nathan began to lose control. "You've played before," Nathan muttered, but it was no longer a question, but a demand. Amira did not flinch. "I said I play a little." "That's not a little," he replied sharply, but she didn't answer, only moving another pawn forward, forcing his bishop to retreat and further disrupting the structure of his queen's flank. The clock spoke for itself. She had used 8 minutes, Nathan 15. The imbalance was taking its toll. Simon Green leaned over to his colleague. Where did she learn to play like that? The question spread like wildfire. Glances shifted from Amira to Elias. When the club president raised an eyebrow, Elias simply said, "Some people are naturally gifted." Nathan's next move, a desperate move with his rook to d6, was not as precise as usual and left his bishop's diagonal unprotected. Amira noticed this instantly and responded with a cold, effective countermove. "Check," she repeated, and Nathan moved his king, but the gaps in his defense were widening. 3 moves later, Amira's queen and rook were lined up in a corridor, a sharp, clean, inevitable checkmate. "Checkmate," she said quietly, and the room fell silent. Nathan Hale, 6-time champion, had been defeated in 27 moves by a woman they had never seen before, a black woman in a simple dress and a worn belt, who did not speak loudly, did not boast, and did not seek applause. The silence lingered. Amira quietly began to arrange the pieces, her hands moving easily, as if this game were not a performance but a practice session. Nathan sat motionless, staring at the board, wishing it would change. He began, but his voice caught. Unexpected. Amira looked at him directly. "Would you like to play again, Mr. Hale?" "I believe the traditional response to defeat is congratulations and a request for a rematch." Her voice remained calm, but its weight was felt throughout the room. Several club members, especially those who had once been in Nathan's place, smiling in victory, exchanged glances and hid their smiles behind their hands. Nathan blushed, realizing that he was no longer the performer, but the object of performance, the one being watched. His pride screamed for him to walk away, but the competitor in him wasn't ready to give up. "Yes, of course," he said, nervously adjusting his jacket. "Rematch." Then, trying to regain his composure, he added, "Although, maybe, let's make it more interesting. Want to bet on something?" Amira's expression cooled, but she remained motionless, and her voice did not waver when she replied, "I don't gamble, Mr. Hale." Nathan, taken aback by her calm refusal, raised his hands in surrender. "Not money," he said quickly, "information. If I win, you'll tell us who you really are and where you learned to play." He paused, waiting for intrigue, but Amira simply bowed her head. "And if I win?" Nathan hesitated, realizing he couldn't offer her anything she wanted, but she finished for him. "You'll stop challenging unsuspecting visitors to this club to duels for your own amusement." A quiet sigh filled the room, her words reinterpreting their past encounters as something far less noble than Nathan liked to think, and for a moment his composure wavered. "Agreed," he said, holding out his hand. Amira shook it without ceremony, and Nathan stepped forward to rearrange the board, this time choosing the white pieces. "I'll be white," he said, his voice regaining its familiar theatrical rhythm. The room quickly filled up, club members came out of their living rooms and libraries, and even the staff lingered discreetly at the doors, pretending to tidy up or serve. But in reality, watching what had already gone from the realm of the unexpected to the realm of legend. "She beat Nathan," someone whispered. "Impossible," said another. "I saw it." Now there was no theatricality. Nathan opened the game with e4, quickly followed by f4, aggressive and direct. But Amira did not flinch. Her responses were clear, her structure solid, her development precise. Within 6 moves, Nathan's early momentum had evaporated, and Amira's queen had moved behind a solid chain of pawns that disrupted his control. Her play was not improvisation. It was theory, accumulated knowledge, honed over years. At the edge of the room, Leon Brooks leaned toward Elias. "She's incredible. Where did you find her?" Elias smiled faintly. "She was my student many years ago, before she changed paths." Leon blinked. "She could teach here." Elias didn't disagree. After 10 moves, Nathan was still holding on, but his line of play had faltered. The traps had been set too early, the sacrifices were illogical, and Amira untangled them all with such clarity that the tension gave way to admiration. Her play seemed less like calculation than memory, an ease and precision that struck the spectators. She kept track of the time without stress, took her time when necessary, simplified when it made sense, and struck when provoked. She plays as if she's solving a problem from memory, someone whispered. Not a puzzle. In the middle of the game, Nathan's king was forced to castle early, his rook on the queen's side was stuck, and the once flawless champion now leaned forward, propping his chin with his hand, no longer a predator but prey. Amira's bishops raced along long diagonals, her knights sat in protected positions, and her queen, moved 3 moves earlier without making a sound, now threatened to break through Nathan's remaining defenses. Chance, she said in a quiet voice, raising her hand easily. Nathan moved his king, barely dodging, but her next pawn split his center, forcing him to retreat. In a last-ditch effort, Nathan lined up his rooks to attack the queen's flank, but it was too late. The queen and Amira's rook responded with a flanking combination so elegant that the room seemed to exhale. Checkmate in 3 moves, she said, and after 3 moves, with no other options left, she gently knocked over his king. Nathan sat motionless, his eyes sliding over the board, then over the crowd, then back to her. "Who are you?" he asked, not with a challenge, but with something more like reverential awe. Amira glanced at Elias, who nodded slightly. "Just a person who loves chess, Mr. Hale," she replied, rising from her chair and adjusting her dress. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Elias and I were about to have dinner." But Nathan wasn't ready to let her go, not with the crowd gathering, not with his wounded pride and curiosity stronger than his disappointment. So he stood up abruptly, his chair scraping quietly against the floor, and he called out, "Wait, Miss Cole." "Miss Daniels," and the room fell silent again, the tension hanging in the air like dust. Amira and Elias stopped at the edge of the crowd and turned to him. The once arrogant champion of the circle of great masters stepped forward, and his voice, unfamiliar to those who knew him, sounded humble. "I must apologize to you," he said, enunciating each word. "I behaved unprofessionally and unkindly." Amir looked at him, her expression unreadable, then replied calmly and clearly, "Apology accepted, Mr. Hale." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Would you mind coming back? Give a lecture? Conduct a demonstration? The club could learn a lot from you." Elias watched her closely, noticing a flicker in her eyes, not pride or temptation, but thoughtfulness. After a pause, she shook her head. "I appreciate your offer, but no. I teach math in an elementary school. Chess is my refuge, not my career." Her answer was sharper than expected, and Nathan seemed genuinely disappointed, not by her refusal, but by how wrong he had been about her. "At least tell me," he asked, his voice quieter, "why you left. You could have been a world champion." Behind his question lay something deeper, something akin to loss. Amir smiled sincerely and gently. "I realized that I loved the game more than winning. The pressure turned it into a chore." Her gaze swept across the elegant room with its gold trim and portraits of former champions, all men, all white, frozen in silent triumph. Chess is beautiful when it's played for the right reasons. When it's about power or humiliation, that beauty disappears. Nathan nodded slowly, understanding the meaning of her words. "Your bet," she reminded him softly. "No more ambushing visitors." He held out his hand, this time not in challenge, but in respect. She shook his hand firmly, then turned to Elias, who offered her his hand. But as they turned to leave, a voice rang out from the crowd, old and uncertain. "Daniels," muttered one of the older club members. "Amir Daniels?" More heads turned. "The prodigy," whispered another. "She disappeared before the international championship." A murmur ran through the crowd. Elias stepped forward, his voice firm. "Some of you may already know. This is Amira Daniels, once the youngest participant in the International Youth Championship. She was 14 years old." Sighs rippled through the crowd as memories surfaced, and several older club members straightened, whispering her name as if it belonged to a myth. Nathan's face changed again, his doubt replaced by something closer to reverence. "I've studied your games," he said. "They're still in the books. Your Sicilian defense in the state finals, the sudden transition to the endgame. But you disappeared before the final." He fell silent, not knowing how to finish. Everyone thought a lot," Amira said softly. "But now it doesn't matter." She turned to Elias and nodded. "Shall we go?" He pointed to the door, and they walked out together, making their way through the crowd that had ignored her arrival and now stood silently, parting to let her pass, no longer unnoticed. When Amira and Elias reached the doors of the Grandmaster's circle, the crowd that had just rejected her now silently stepped aside. No applause, no words, just a quiet acknowledgement earned not by a title, but by self-control, clarity, and unwavering self-restraint. When the doors opened and the light of the city flooded into the room, her silhouette stretched across the polished floor like the closed cover of a book. She looked back once, not in triumph, not in defiance, simply acknowledging what remained, and disappeared into the Boston night, leaving behind a silence that seemed reverent rather than awkward. Inside, the silence lingered, then gave way to quiet, impatient whispers. The participants replayed the game from memory, tracing invisible moves on the tables, rushing to reconstruct her strategy before it disappeared. At one table, two young players argued about the last sequence of moves. Nearby, a gray-haired participant quoted, "A middle game without a queen. A reverse Sicilian defense, 37 moves," trying to prove that it must be the prodigy they had once read about. In the center of the room, under the chandelier, Nathan Hale remained seated, his fingers still on the table, not in denial, but in thought. After a pause, he pulled out a black notebook, opened it to a blank page, and began to rewrite the match. No comments, no ego, just moves, circling his mistakes, documenting what had exposed him. Not to forget, but to understand. No one approached him. There were no false condolences, no quiet jokes. Everyone felt that something unusual had happened. Not just a defeat, but a change in the very foundation of the room. A reminder that skill speaks softly, while ego loses loudly. Near the hallway, the administrator leaned against the wall, clutching her notebook, remembering how she had almost refused Amira. She said nothing, but her face showed the tension of someone who had suddenly realized their own bias. Near the fireplace, two former champions argued about whether Amira had provoked Nathan's attack or whether she had adapted with incredible speed in the middle of the game, and neither explanation made her any less remarkable. Elias returned, nodded to the president, and sat down at the bar, not to explain himself or voice his thoughts aloud, but simply to observe the unfolding effect. The voices were quieter now, her name spoken with particular weight, as if the room itself refused to forget her footsteps. Simon Green quietly approached Nathan, sat down opposite him, and after a long pause said, "She made you look human, Nate." Nathan didn't answer right away. Then, without looking up, he replied, "No, Simon. She reminded me that I still have a lot to learn." If you enjoyed this story about justice, click the like button and subscribe to hear more inspiring stories that remind us of what really matters in life. And tell us, where are you watching from? We'd love to know.